All right. Proceed at will.
Well, hello out there in podcast land, and welcome back to the Front Row Network, the podcast for people who actually like movies. And welcome to the premiere episode of the newest series to the Front Row Network, Get Hyped, the show where we get you hyped for the latest installment of Hollywood's biggest franchises. I'm your host for this episode, Lou Hare, although I'm not probably going to be the permanent host. I don't think we're going to have a permanent host because what we're aiming to do with this show is to get you prepared for the latest installment of, hold on, I'm going to start that over because I just repeated myself.
No worries.
Okay. Well, hello out there in podcast land, and welcome back to the Front Row Network of Podcasts, the podcast for people who actually like movies. And welcome to the premiere episode of our newest series, Get Hyped, the show where we get you hyped for the latest installment of Hollywood's biggest franchises. I'm your host for this episode, Lou Hare. I'm probably not going to be the permanent host for this show. We're going to rotate it around with all of our different Front Row contributors. And let me take a minute to explain to you what we're attempting to do with this podcast. See, there are plenty of sequels out there. There's all these franchises. Everybody has new chapters of these stories that they're telling constantly. And occasionally, we might forget or need a little reminder of what came before without getting to actually see the movie. So what we're going to do is we're going to recap the previous entry of the franchise, and then we're going to speculate wildly about what's coming, what's to come. We're going to talk a lot about what we've seen in the trailers and what we hope to see and what we hope not to see, kind of to jog your memory about what has happened and get you excited about what's to come. So joining me on this maiden voyage, please welcome back to the Front Row Network, a contributor to the Front Row Movie Reviews website. Please welcome Phil Rockwell. How's it going, Phil?
Good morning, sir, on this fine day of election and whatnot.
It is. Yes, we are recording on election day. The world is completely different by the time you've heard this. Maybe. I don't know.
God, we're hoping so.
Or, you know.
as long as it's not on fire, we're good.
Well, exactly. So, yeah, because I really hope that the world's not on fire so I can get to see this movie. That's really, human rights and all that sort of stuff. But I need to see Creed 2.
We know where our priorities are.
Exactly. But so, yeah, let's dive right into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a recap of the previous entry, which is really easy because this is the sequel to 2015's Creed. This is going to get way dicier when we get into like Avengers 4 and we've got to recap like 18 different movies or feed them all into.
Excuse me. Captain Marvel is first.
Captain Marvel is first, correct. But having as a standalone, that one should be fairly easy because there's not a lot to tie in at least. But we are.
That's true. It does go back in time, so
we're going to get to do that. All the MCU movies, and what I'm looking forward to, John Wick 3 when that comes out in May, recapping that and talking. But anyway, that's where you can see why we decided to do this podcast, because we're really excited about these movies and we want to talk about them and we want to give you the chance to kind of jog your memory. So no spoilers when it comes to the upcoming movies. All of the information that we're going to give you is from either IMDb or from released trailers. So if you are totally spoiler averse to not even want to see a trailer or something, maybe this isn't for you, but we're not going to go in. We didn't go find leaked scripts or anything like that. We're not going to talk about stuff like that. We're just going to give you what we've been given by the studio to talk about it. However, we are going to spoil the hell out of Creed because the movie's 3 years old and you kind of need to know maybe a little bit about what's going on in the franchise if you're going to jump right in and see Creed 2. So 60-second recap. Here we go. Creed, released in 2015, written and directed by Ryan Coogler, starring Michael B. Jordan and Sylvester Stallone. Creed introduces us to Adonis Creed, the son of the late Apollo Creed. Donnie, as he's known by most, quits his cushy 9-to-5 job to pursue boxing full-time. He moves to Philadelphia and seeks out Rocky Balboa to train him. Rocky shoots him down at first, but eventually agrees. Donnie also meets Bianca, a nightclub singer who lives with a degenerative hearing disorder that will one day leave her deaf. The two begin a romance that is challenged by Donnie's temperament, which we see throughout the film as his biggest flaw. Donnie has some initial success, but chooses not to fight under his birth name, Creed. However, once he is outed as Creed's son, he's offered a shot at the light heavyweight champion. Creed accepts despite his reluctance to take on his father's name. Rocky, meanwhile, is diagnosed with cancer. Rocky, who has lost all of the members of his family, is ready to throw in the towel, but Donnie convinces him to fight the disease. In the film's climactic fight, Donnie admits to Rocky that his motivation for fighting has been to prove to himself that he was not a mistake. The film ends in the same way that the original Rocky ends, with Donnie losing the fight via split decision, but going the distance and proving something to himself and establishing himself as a promising young fighter. That was about 60 seconds, right? I think.
No one's counting.
Okay, so let's jump right into our initial thoughts. And like I said, this is not going to be a deep dive on Creed, but this is going to be more just talking a little bit about the film so we can segue into what we're looking forward for Creed 2. So Phil, what were your initial thoughts or overall thoughts on Creed?
For lack of a better word, I think Creed is a masterpiece. I think it's been too long since I've seen the original Rocky, but I have no hesitation in saying that Creed is in the top 1 or 2 of the Rocky universe films. I think what Ryan Coogler did was fantastic. There were scenes in Creed that I felt like someone had taken a cattle prod to my spine because I just wanted to get up. And I've seen enough movies that I don't have that sort of visceral reaction to films very often, but Creed did that to me. The other thing about Creed that I think plays into some of my concerns I have about Creed 2 is Creed is so little about building to a big fight. Certainly there's a big fight on the horizon and we're aware of that, but so much of the drama was everything else that Creed and Balboa and Tessa Thompson's character were dealing with, the personal stuff that they had to overcome. And a big theme of the film is you're fighting yourself. It's not about fighting the guy across the ring from you necessarily. You're fighting to overcome, to break through the walls that you have established inside your own spirit and inside your own mind. And Creed 2, I mean, right out the gate, we kind of know Creed 2 is all about building to this one fight. And that's going to be a big narrative shift from the way the story was told in Creed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said. I love Creed. I still love Creed. We saw this in the theater, and it was just like what you said. The fight scenes are so amazing. You think by this Creed is the 7th film in what I call the RCU, the Rocky Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
That you've seen every possible permutation of fight scenes, and you haven't if you haven't seen Creed. No. If you're listening to this podcast, hopefully, I mean, obviously we gave you kind of the plot outline there, but do yourself a favor and see this movie because it's fantastic, whether you see Creed 2 or not. But you hit the nail on the head too in how well defined the characters are, and it does harken back to the original Rocky, which is a character-driven piece.
Right.
I went back and I'm writing a series of articles for the Front Row website on the Rocky Cinematic Universe, some of which you might be able to see right now as you're listening to this. But one of the things I did is I went back and I just watched the fight scenes, devoid of context. And what's fascinating is the fight scenes in the first film and in Creed are some of the shorter ones in the whole series. And what's even fascinating about the final scene, to your point, the final fight in Creed, they spend more time on the conversations in the corner than they do on the actual fights. There's more dialogue in that fight sequence than I think any previous fight. And that speaks to kind of what you're saying, is that this was a movie that, it's about boxing, but it's about boxing in the same way the first Rocky was about boxing, where boxing was the device that then allowed you to explore the characters. So I can't say enough good things. And I was, I hadn't seen Fruitvale Station at the time. And so this was the first time I'd seen Ryan Coogler direct anything, and he was just brilliant. He's obviously a phenomenal talent. And he then goes on and makes Black Panther, which is one of my favorite superhero movies, MCU films of all time. So I won't spoil. I did do a ranking of where it ranks, but go to the website. You can see my rankings and see, but Creed is pretty high.
Yeah, so, it's interesting. You mentioned the thing in the corner, and what was interesting about that, aside from the fact that they spend so much time in the corner, is it seems like most of the corner conversations in the initial Rocky films, they weren't about the craft of boxing. They were the coach, quote unquote, trying to get Rocky fired up. Whereas this was, Rocky was literally telling him, this is what he's doing. This is what you have to do. I think certainly compared to the last 1, 2, 3, since probably Rocky 2, it seemed more down and dirty in the craft of boxing. Like, I feel like it felt authentic in a way that movies like 4 and 3 didn't. Like, I felt like I understood the sport of boxing more after watching Creed than the Rocky films that I can remember.
Right. Well, let's be honest. Rocky 4 is, first of all, it's barely a movie, and I say that lovingly, but it has little to no resemblance to actual boxing.
Absolutely not.
It is an action movie, maybe first, and musical second, boxing movie third. But we'll address that on a different podcast. But yeah, I agree. I think they really did return to the roots of the story and what made it. And because Coogler himself said that he basically made Creed for his father. His father he loved the Rocky films, and he thought, hey, what if I did a Rocky movie? And he wrote the script, he gave it to Stallone, and Stallone gave it his blessing, and then off, so it was done by someone with clearly reverence to the series. That's
very cool.
And you got to love that. And it paid off because the movie's a big hit. It's critically acclaimed. Stallone himself wins the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. He's nominated for an Oscar. It's a good return to form for him as an actor. So yeah, I think clearly the stage was set for a sequel, which is what we're going to get to now, because you mentioned it a bit, Phil. So far, what we've seen out of the hype for Creed 2 has been really centered around the main fight, because what we know from IMDb, again, this is just the synopsis by them, so no real big spoilers here, that under the tutelage of Rocky, newly crowned light heavyweight champion Adonis Creed faces off against Victor Drago, the son of Ivan Drago, who infamously killed Apollo Creed in the ring in Rocky 4. So yeah, that right off the bat tells you that we might shift a little bit more towards the fight. But what I will say is, when you saw the trailers for Creed, when it first came out, I don't think they made any mention of Rocky's cancer diagnosis. They didn't mention Bianca's hearing loss or anything. Those personal touches were kind of taken out in favor of your typical kind of sports movie, hoorah type trailer. So there is some hope there that I think, and we'll get to that and what we're looking forward to see. But let's tell you a little bit about what we do know about Creed 2 beyond just the plot. So Ryan Coogler got hired on to do Black Panther. So he is not the writer or director of this film. He did hire, he played a big hand in hiring the director, the new director, Stephen Capel Jr., I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. He only has one previous film credit to his name.
Which is what?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. It was a film I was not familiar with.
Okay.
But that is The Land. 2016's The Land, which I was not familiar with.
Familiar with that at all now.
Yeah. So, and the writing team has shifted. The story was by Chio Hodari Coker and Sasha Penn. Coker was the creator of Luke Cage for Netflix, which I didn't get to see, but I know a lot of people were big fans of. And then the screenplay, Jewel Taylor and Sylvester Stallone. So Stallone's back helping to write the film, which is something he didn't do in the previous films, although he had a hand in the screenplay for all of the other Rocky films.
Mm-hmm.
All the cast is returning. And as we mentioned earlier, Victor Drago is cast by boxer Florian Munteanu, and then Ivan Drago, played by Dolph Lundgren, is returning to the series. So that's basically what we know. The other thing that we learned from that's not in the screenplay, in the synopsis on IMDb, but we know from the trailers, is that Bianca and Adonis have a baby. So Donnie becomes a father, and so that adds some new dynamic to the relationship. But that's pretty much what we know so far. So let's start off with what are you hoping to see, Phil, out of this new installment?
Well, I really hope that they stay kind of grounded in the world of boxing. I think Bianca provides a very interesting opportunity. I'm sort of tired of seeing movies about men making selfish and or bad decisions and being lauded for it. But there was a sequence in Creed where Bianca confronted Donnie and essentially said, "Oh, I'm just here to inspire you." Like, she was deconstructing all of the bullshit lines that guys are like, "Oh, you're a part of me. You're this, that, and the other thing." And she's established as a very woke and unforgiving young lady when it comes to what she expects from someone she's romantically involved with. And I hope that she plays a big role in sort of examining why Creed needs to take this fight. What is it exactly he's chasing? Be the counterpoint. You have a family now. I would assume that her hearing disability is going to probably accelerate for the sake of the narrative, and that will provide its own thing as well. I want us to stay in the realm of Creed and Rocky 1 rather than lean into the sort of Rocky 3 or Rocky 4 era. Certainly take the plot points of Rocky 4, but keep them grounded, keep them add some gravitas to them, take out the sort of action movie overtones of that film, and just keep it grounded. That was something that Creed did so well, that it established itself as different from the Rocky movies that we've been familiar with, and made it a personal story again. And I want to see that. I want to see that again. That same sort of feeling.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, one of the things I noted when we watched the trailer is that Tessa Thompson her name is above the credits along with Michael B. Jordan and Sylvester Stallone this time. And sometimes, I don't know, sometimes that's an indicator and sometimes it's not in terms of the role that they play.
Yeah.
Part of that could be because Tessa Thompson become a much more visible actress. And
her bona fides went up a lot in the last 3 years.
Right. So some of it could be that, but some of it also could, I guess if I'm reading into that optimistically, it does tell me she's going to be a pretty vital role in this movie, and in a different way, because obviously when you could walk into it, you could see, oh, well, she's going to be the Adrian, and there's really very little comparison to Adrian and Bianca. Other than the fact that they are the romantic interests of the main character. That expansion I think is interesting. To build off of that, a couple of characters I'm kind of hoping we get a little bit more expansion on too is Phylicia Rashad's character, the role of Adonis's mother, because first of all, I can't get enough Phylicia Rashad in my life. So I'm excited I would be excited to see her more, but also because I do think it does build off of more of that, what you said, that kind of that character world building, and make it more of a grounded film of people, of the real life consequences of this kind of pursuit that he's having, and learning to balance his responsibilities as a father and a son, and as well as a boxer.
And one of the big emphases, one of the big themes of Creed ended up being family. You have these we'll say this group of four, if you include Phylicia Rashad's character, there's no blood between them. Phylicia Rashad is Adonis's adopted mother, not biological mother. Rocky is called Uncle by Donnie, but no blood there. It's this sort of makeshift family that developed, and it was family that drove Rocky to get the help that he needed for cancer, and there was very much we're in this together. And then obviously, when there's a child brought in between Bianca and Donnie, that family sort of unit is going to get even stronger, but also more precarious at the same time.
And the other thing I'd love to see, and I don't know if they'll do it or not, there's no indicator that they will, but this is just wish list, is I would love a scene between Phylicia Rashad's character Marianne and Rocky, because I would love, Rocky's always felt a little bit of guilt for what happened to Apollo, and that doesn't get addressed as much in the first film. Just so to see them cross paths, I think could provide a really kind of an interesting moment in how they would choose to handle it. Does she have resentment towards Rocky? Has enough time passed? I think that bringing her in as part of that kind of that family would be really interesting to me. And I think it would give Phylicia Rashad some more to do, which I guess is kind of what I'm hoping for. The other interesting character that we got just a glimmer of in the first film and we don't see in the second, but he's listed on the IMDb credits, is Wood Harris's character, Little Duke, which is the son of Apollo's original trainer, Duke, or Tony, depending on which depending on which entry of the series you're watching. He's either goes by Tony or Duke. But as a trainer who rejects Donnie at first, and so I'm curious to see if he does get an expanded role, if we see more of him. I think that may just be more me wanting a mini Wire reunion in my Creed movies, and then we'll get Idris Elba for Creed 3. Let's just go.
There you go.
Let's just go all in. But yeah, I think all of that's kind of in that same realm of just to see an expansion of the characters. And the thing that I'm really intrigued about, I think I'm intrigued about this more than anything, is the handling of the character of Ivan Drago. In that he is, we talked about Rocky IV. Rocky IV is so far, it's so amazing that these two movies are in the same universe.
Yeah.
The same franchise that gives you Rocky IV can also give you Creed. But one thing that they showed, there was a featurette that just got released a couple of days ago that showed Drago with a couple of lines, which he doesn't have in the trailer. So, we are going to, I do think they're going to work to making that character a little bit more grounded, which is fascinating considering he's a, glorified action figure.
Oh, he's superhuman in Rocky IV.
Mm-hmm. So to explore his human element, I think is going to be interesting, and I'll be interested to see how that all plays out.
Well, and there is an opportunity there. He is a Russian athlete, and anybody who knows anything about sort of Russian athletics it's kind of life or death.
Mm-hmm.
And considering not only did he lose to Balboa in 4, but he kind of embarrassed Russia. I mean, that was the whole thing back then. It was U.S. versus Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union lost. And I don't know modern day Russia if it honestly it may be a case where this is. Drago is looking for his own redemption in the eyes of his country by training his son.
Yeah, absolutely. And they hint that a little bit at the one scene that they show of Drago is that, he is essentially a disgraced figure who does have some motivation to want to, get at least, reclaim his family's name, which I think is a nice parallel between that and the Creed family. So I think there's meat there. I think there's stuff to be explored. So I'm excited to see if they can do it and do it in a way that doesn't make Ivan Drago seem like a completely different character. That there's still hints of that initial character, but maybe, after 30 years of the world beating him down, what is he like? So I'm kind of, as someone who's a huge fan of the Rocky franchise, I think that's intriguing to me. And I guess the other thing that I'm hoping to see is I really am hoping to see some of the energy of the fight sequences that we got in that first film. And that's going to kind of segue, I think, to a little bit about what might be some things we're a little concerned about. And that is, the absence of Ryan Coogler, who I think, he's a once in a generation filmmaker.
Oh yeah. He's a singular talent. He is, he's a guy that everything that he puts out, I'm gonna be like, oh, I need to see this.
Right. So his absence, I was a little concerned when they said he wasn't going to be coming back because he was busy doing Black Panther, but he did have a role in choosing this next director. So obviously, there's some connection there. And obviously a new director is going to have a new vision and a new way of taking over. I will say, as much as I love the franchise and as much as my childhood and movie fandom is tied into him, I'm at least glad that they didn't just hand it back over to Stallone to direct, because I think that would have just been a sign of, okay, we're going to totally just go back to the Rocky franchise.
The status quo.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I'm at least excited to, this is a new filmmaker, and this is only the 4th filmmaker to direct any of these movies. This is all the other films before Creed were directed by either Rocky or John G. Avildsen. So it's again interesting to see what a new voice might bring onto it. That said, I hope that at least some of the visual style of Coogler has rubbed off. Because those fight sequences are some of the best of the series, and if you can, as you pointed out earlier, rope someone in who's seen enough of these movies to be able to distance, I think is quite the feat. So, yeah, I think that's one of my bigger concerns, and also the fact that with Coogler not writing the film as well, you've got a whole new set of writers on board. Hopefully they learn from Creed and a little less from some of the later entries of the Rocky franchise.
Yeah, definitely. I sort of mentioned my concern earlier, making it a sort of man's gonna do what man's gonna do, which actually, having seen Creed, that's less of a concern. My issue is, so Creed makes a big deal about weight class. Like they actually say, I think Michael B. Jordan says his weight at one point, like it's maybe like in the 180s, 185, something like that. Drago, baby Drago, if we can even call him that, he's easily 240 pounds.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like when he doesn't win the fight at the end of Creed, the winning boxer comes up to him and says, "Hey, you're the future of this division," blah, 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 blah. I mean, even when you see shots of Michael B. Jordan and Drago next to each other, it's like, oh, good. It looks like Thunder Lips.
Right.
Like that's what it looks like. It looks like, and a part of me is like, oh, that's kind of, I mean, I know they want them to fight, but maybe we shouldn't have gone for a monster. Maybe go for someone who's in a similar class. I don't know how you get around that.
Yeah. Well, I guess I wonder, because I think that does make some sense, because one of the things that they say in the trailers a lot is how scared they are for him because he's taking on this monster. Right. And, I guess the realistic way of looking at, and whether or not they address this or not, but is perhaps Creed is fighting out of his weight class to take on this fight.
Yeah.
He becomes light heavyweight champion according to the plot synopsis. And actually that's not really much of a spoiler, because there's a photo in the trailer there, he's got a belt behind him as he's making his ring entrance. So maybe it is a light heavyweight fighting a heavyweight, which, at least if they do that, addresses kind of one of the biggest, because the RCU does fudge a lot when it comes to weight classes in boxing. By Rocky IV, like Stallone's like 185. He's, he's trimmed, and that's like 98% muscle, but he is nowhere near heavyweight status. And really at any point in the franchise. So, but you have to say heavyweight championship, because at least in that era, that was the time that really heavyweight boxing was the only boxing that people really gravitated towards. Yeah. And that changed in like the 90s and 2000s, but you kind of had to be heavyweight champion, even though he clearly didn't look it. And even when they do Rocky Balboa, he's fighting the heavyweight champion of the world, who's played by Antonio Tarver, who is a light heavyweight boxer. So,
oh yeah, okay,
yeah. So there's been some fudging on that over the years. So maybe if I would love that if they actually address that. Oh, what are you doing? This guy's outweighs you by 30 pounds. He's a heavyweight. You're a lightweight. Why are you taking this fight?
Well, and a part of boxing is managing weight. So maybe he does try to go up a weight class, and what usually happens with that is you tend to be slower. You tend to get gassed a little. I mean, when you're boxing out of your weight class, that's its own sort of trial. So based on the workouts and stuff that are in the trailer, I could see it being about him maybe bumping up bumping up a weight class to get there, we're still dealing with the fact that when the two stand next together, one looks to be about 2/3 the other's mass.
Right. Well, and I guess that's they cast an actual boxer to take on an actor who's playing a boxer. And I'm sure, as ripped as Michael B. Jordan is for the film, you can't make him taller.
No, you can't.
So yeah, that's going to be an interesting handling, but I love the fact that we can even talk about that, because that shows that the realism that the franchise has taken on. The other thing that I want to touch on, and you mentioned it earlier, but the handling of both Bianca's hearing and Rocky's cancer, and how those two stories progress, because I kind of get the sense that Coogler might have, or at some point we might see Rocky die.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that, but there's also, that's not hinted at all in this trailer, but it seemed like maybe that's where they would have gone. But it doesn't seem like they're heading in that direction for this film. So I'm curious whether or not his diagnosis is something that's addressed at all in the film.
Well, so people are going to hear us talk about the MCU and my issues with this and call me a freaking hypocrite. I think Rocky being there adds more drama than taking him out. Because Creed, Donnie is dealing with, he's gonna have to deal with the name Creed, right? So there's a father-son thing there, but so much of what made Creed work is Balboa's own struggles with, with getting back into boxing with this kid that he doesn't owe anything to, but he feels like he does. Rocky is there's too much good drama to be mined out of Rocky's reaction to him, facing the guy who killed his best friend. It's just, death is easy in this case. Like, death causes drama, like it does. Right. But I feel like if you work harder to do, life has enough of its own stakes that aren't life and death, that, especially in this case, I would rather see them dig deeper into Rocky's guilt and Rocky's history than make him a redundancy to Donnie's following in his father's footsteps. I don't think we need Rocky's death. We don't need it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think there seems to be a lot going on already that I think if you tried to shoehorn that in, that might be, maybe that's a Creed 3 storyline. I don't know. Or maybe not. Maybe like you said, maybe he just exists beyond, as for until Stallone can't do it anymore.
Right.
The one thing and you mentioned it sparked something that I thought that I hope gets touched on is, Drago ended Rocky's career more or less. Rocky wins that fight, but he's never the same. He retires in Rocky 5. He has the comeback one last match in Rocky Balboa, but he's really damaged from Drago, physically and emotionally, because of what he did to Apollo and then what he did to him in their fight, even though Rocky wins. So I would love to see, I think there's a lot to be mined from that. And I kind of hope they go to that, because I'm sure that, Rocky went through a lot of trauma at the hands of Ivan Drago. And I think that could be something, if you're going to address this in a real scenario, which they don't, Rocky 4 doesn't really address. So it's there for the taking in this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting idea, and then also you mentioned earlier with Bianca's hearing loss subplot, whether or not that progresses and how that changes any of Creed's motivation in terms of what he needs to do or why he needs to do it. And I think that leads to the last thing that we're going to talk about here in terms of maybe areas where we're concerned, because you and I did an article that's up on the Front Row Movie Reviews website when the initial trailer came out, and that throwed in some concerns as to what motivates Creed to fight. And that's been an interesting concept because throughout the series, because Rocky 2 has maybe the worst motivation. Rocky basically fights in Rocky 2 because he needs the money. It's maybe the more, then the third one, he overcomes his fear. The fourth one, he's avenging Apollo's death. And
he's completely in a depressive state. Like he makes all the decisions as if he is thoroughly, like clinically depressed. Where are you going to fight? I guess we're going to fight in Russia. Why are you fighting? That press conference is like the worst sort of reasoning. So yeah, that's just one of my, as I've grown up, I'm like, oh man, I think he is clinically depressed in that movie.
I'm sure he is.
And then he exercises to overcome it.
Oh yeah, hey, we all have our ways of managing. That's his coping skill is to
go up on a mountain and lift carts or wood.
Sure. But yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things to see whether or not because the series at its most critical point, you could say, veers very much into the alpha male territory.
Yeah.
And to whether or not this movie goes in that, goes to that direction or strives for something a little different, I think is interesting.
Yeah, the way Creed was constructed, I am completely ready to be surprised by Creed 2. I just think Creed its narrative did not flow in a way that was typical of these films. One of the things I liked is he's fighting this guy. At the end of Creed, he fights a guy who's way out of his class, like more experienced, just an all-around more seasoned fighter, longer reach, taller. All the stats are off the charts, but he's the champ, and he's asking to fight you. Well, everyone has to take that chance. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like if boxing is what you want to do and the champ says, hey, I want to fight you, you take that fight. Mm-hmm. So the reasoning for that, it made perfect sense. Yeah, I'm concerned about his what drives him to fight Drago is going to be in that bro mode, whether it's revenge or, feeling the need to overcome his father's legacy by being the prodigy of, did I say progeny of Drago? But I'm willing to be surprised, and I have less concerns about that. All of my concerns went down a whole lot after I was blown out of my socks by Creed. So I have concerns, but I've seen a trailer, and one of the things about Creed, the trailer doesn't tell you what you're getting into. No. Like, it doesn't tell you how it's going to upset the apple cart in terms of the Rocky franchise. Mm-hmm. And I think it's established a new status quo for the franchise. Mm-hmm. And Coogler's smart. He's going to hire smart people. And I think I'm way more jazzed to see this film naturally after seeing Creed.
Sure. All right. Well, so with that, let's go to our, I guess for lack of a better term, our hype meter here. So there's tiers, I think, with every movie on how excited we are for these movies. So so what would you say, Phil? Is this an opening weekend? Is this definitely see it in the theater? Is this I'm going to wait to stream it, or is this I'm going to avoid it altogether? How hyped are you for Creed 2?
I'm going to do everything I can to see it in the theater. You and I are both husbands and fathers, and the theater has become something of a luxury as to when we were single men about town. But Creed, to have seen those fight scenes on the big screen, I'm not going to miss a chance to do that if I can help it at all. Yeah, I mean, if Creed was playing in a theater right now, I'd be calling into work to go see it, because I can't express enough. Creed felt like when I saw Selma the first time. It was a movie that had a good reputation, Best Picture winner or Best Picture nominee, had all these bona fides. I'm like, okay. And then when I saw them, I was like, oh, we are not talking about these films enough, because these are arrivals of very, very incredibly talented, visionary filmmakers. And they're throwing the gauntlet down, and that it was super cool to see in both those films, one being Ava DuVernay and then of course Ryan Coogler. So both African-American filmmakers that, man, they really blew me away with their sort of the films that made them famous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right there with you. If I could see this opening weekend, I will absolutely. This comes out this Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, which is just, for, as you mentioned, people with, wives and spouses and families and children and all that sort of stuff. It's going to be hard to work in, but if I can, I'm absolutely going to see this in the theater. I did get to see Creed in the theater. Luckily, I've roped my wife into the RCU. So yeah, well, she had to see Rocky before we could get married. That was a prereq. So, and since then she's watched them all with me, and she was on board for Creed. So if we can get childcare, we will definitely be seeing this, because I was floored by how good Creed was when I saw it, and I've loved it every time I've watched it since. So to see even if there's a hope that the film is anywhere in that ballpark, it's worth seeing. I'm not, I'm gonna hedge my bets just a little, because like I said earlier, Coogler is such a singular talent that if somebody can even kind of replicate or get in the ballpark of his storytelling and his style, it's going to be a good movie. And so I'm gonna definitely check it out. And obviously I have a huge softness in my heart for the Rocky franchise and the series. So the fact that we're now 8 films in and there's a movie to actually be excited about is really something. And I guess the other thing that we haven't even really talked too much about is Creed himself, Michael B. Jordan, who gives such a great performance. He's so good that it's like, oh, I'm willing to follow this character, even though he's it's Creed. It's not Rocky 7.
No, it's not.
And it's his movie. Creed is his movie. And you don't mind that you're watching a Rocky movie where Rocky takes kind of a back seat. And because he's such a well-written character, and Michael B. Jordan is such a star and such a great actor, that to see him keep moving forward with that character, I think is something else.
Something I do think we should bring up is you and I are in our late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past several years, we have had the benefit of seeing characters that were so important to us as kids
Mm-hmm.
in these new movies playing older versions of the characters we've had. We have Rocky playing an older character. We just had Halloween, which was super rad to see.
Oh, yeah.
Jamie Lee Curtis in. We had Luke Skywalker and Han Solo back on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think there's anything that precedes these types of films where you're seeing these characters 40 years later, and not only are we just it's not an empty exercise. They've added these new dynamics to the characters, and especially in the three cases that I mentioned, Last Jedi, Halloween, and Creed, they have crushed it.
Oh yeah.
And how cool is that? 40 years to get 40 years and all that history to get to this point, and they nail it.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's making a big deal. Oh, 10 years to get to Infinity War. Hey, 40 years to get to these other ones. I mean, that's bananas.
That is. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because we are at that age, because it is so, when you can do it right, it's a great examination of these characters as time has passed that doesn't feel like sequelitis, where you're just putting these characters through the same tropes. You're examining them now that they've had some time to think about and absorb what happened to them in the previous entries. And that to me that's great. I love it's a nugget that Rocky Balboa built on a little bit, because I think Rocky Balboa is a little underrated. But Creed does it Creed expands on that and does it so well with the character of Rocky, who by this point has lost everybody in his life. And Creed came out the same year as Star Wars, as episode Force Awakens came out.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of comparisons about, Han Solo and Rocky Balboa, both of these kind of characters who've seen a lot of shit and are now kind of like reconciling some of that. And I think that's awesome. And I think it's great to see that. And then also to tell these stories in a modern way, that they're just not rehashing and aping the styles of old movies. Because like I said earlier with Michael B. Jordan, you may not know the Rocky franchise. You could see Creed and not have seen any of the previous Rocky movies, I think, and be on board with it, because it's a movie that has a young energy to it. And it's directed by a young filmmaker. It's not a shameless cash grab. I think the thing that you see with the three films I mentioned is they were written from a place of love for the franchise. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like the studio went, "Hey, we need another one of these." It was a fan essentially coming up with this concept and going, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Because really, Sylvester Stallone had the blessing of, or Creed had the blessing of Sylvester Stallone. Mm-hmm. Halloween had the blessing of Jamie Lee Curtis and John Carpenter. Mm-hmm. These were things that, and even J.J. Abrams was brought in for Force Awakens. Even if you have issues with J.J. Abrams, you can't say he's not a devoted fan of the franchise. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to bring in people who love these characters, DCU, and let them, let them be the stewards. And I think instead of trying to make it corporate, just find people who love these franchises and let them go nuts. Yeah. And it's fascinating as we're talking about this. And because one of the things we talk about, if you just look at like film history, I just talked about the 70s in my class the other day, and about how that was the first generation of filmmakers that grew up watching movies. and that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were basically recreating the movies they loved as kids. And I think that passion that you talk about is so vital, because that's now what we're seeing now with the benefits to, I'm not opposed to reboot culture. I'm not opposed to sequels. I'm opposed to bad movies.
Yeah.
If you can make Halloween 40 years later and make it good, fine. I don't care that it's the 7th in the series.
Right.
But it all goes to what you said. Yeah. A respect for the source material, or at least a love of it and an understanding of why we love these movies and what made them great in the first place. Not let's just continue it. Let's carbon copy it. Because that's the other thing, is all of those movies that you mentioned have a new take on it as well.
Yeah.
They build off of it rather than just copying it. And so it's like, oh, I love this. I want to bring it back, and I want to keep it going in a compelling way so that these stories, so that we can get more of these characters because we love them and we want future generations to love them.
Right. Yeah, it's a very cool time to be a middle-aged film goer.
Finally,
Yeah, finally, it's our white dude's time.
Something for us. Oh, and I'm saying this on election day, so that could be really. That statement could be really problematic by the time this comes out. But no, seriously, I love these films are great, and I hope for the best for Creed 2. I'm very excited. I'm hyped. I hope you guys are hyped for it too. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Get Hyped. Like we said, we're going to be revisiting anytime we can get some people together to preview an upcoming installment of a franchise, and there's tons of them. We've got all sorts of stuff coming out. We talked about Captain Marvel and Avengers 4, and then we've also got Bumblebee. We've got all sorts of Fantastic Beasts. We've got Mary Poppins. We've got all sorts of franchises going on. Poppins. So anytime we can get together and help talk about these and have fun and get hyped, get you hyped for these, we're going to do it. So with that, we also have all sorts of stuff going on for the rest of the month of November and also for December. Thanksgiving is coming up this week, but then we're going to turn right around and get into the holiday season. So we're going to have tons of holiday themed episodes coming up on the Front Row Network. So make sure you are subscribing to the podcast. Make sure you are checking our Facebook page, the Front Row Network, so you can see anytime a show comes up. And if you're looking for more Rocky RCU content, you can go to the Guilty Pleasures feed and download the latest episode, which is on Rocky 4. That will be a much different conversation than the conversation we are having right now. I think we will. That one's going to be, there will be at least 50% more James Brown talk.
Absolutely.
I can guarantee that. So, but yeah, so check that out and check out everything that we're doing. Follow us on Twitter at Front Row Reviews. You can follow me on Twitter at The Fake Lou Hair. And also, the hype isn't done for Creed 2. Go to thefrontrowmoviereviews.com. I've got my RCU rankings up. I'm going to do an article about all the fight scenes, watching them. And I don't know if it's going to be a ranking yet, or if it's going to be a kind of a journal of my journey through just watching the fight scenes. We're also going to talk about a workout mix from all the great the great songs from the RCU. There's some bangers in there, guys. There's just, there's some good stuff there. So yes, as you can tell, I'm very excited about this movie, and I want to talk all things Rocky. So go to thefrontrowmoviereviews.com and listen to me or read me go on and on about this franchise. And Phil, do you have anything coming up or anything you want to plug right now?
No. Enjoy your holiday. Hopefully, we are on our way to. By now, we have some checks and balances in the hopper, and enjoy the holiday. Yeah. Go see Creed. I think it'll be worth it. Yeah. And if you haven't seen the first one, holy shit, see it. It's exquisite.
Yes, 100%. Definitely check that out if you can see it before Creed 2. If not, just see it whenever you can, because yeah, it is excellent. And if we can, hopefully we will be back to do a full disclosure on Creed 2 if we can get to see it within a timely fashion. With the holiday season, everybody's schedule is all over the place, so we will try to do that if we can. So until then, for the Front Row Movie Reviews, I'm Lou Hare.
I'm Phil Rockwell.
And as always, we'll see you in the front row.